The small plane sat quietly on the runway, bathed in the soft morning sunlight. Passengers were settling in, some chatting quietly, others staring out of the windows at the fields below. Among them was a 10-year-old girl who moved with calm certainty, buckling her seatbelt and arranging her small bag beside her. She was quiet, observant, and carried herself with a poise that seemed older than her years. While other children were fidgeting or asking questions, she simply watched everything, noticing small details that seemed to matter more than the adults around her realized. The hum of engines began as the pilot prepared for takeoff. The co-pilot checked instruments, exchanged a few words with the pilot, and the plane slowly rolled down the runway. As it lifted into the air, the passengers felt the familiar thrill of ascent. Some clutched the armrests with nervous excitement, while others leaned back, enjoying the view of the countryside shrinking below. The girl stared straight ahead, eyes sharp and calm, taking in every movement, every sound. For a while, everything felt normal. The sun streamed through the windows, lighting the cabin in a warm glow. A few passengers chatted about their plans for the day while others dozed quietly. The girl's mother, sitting across the aisle, smiled at her daughter, thinking how composed she was compared to other children. She did not need to tell her daughter to sit still or be quiet. It was as if the girl had a natural sense of how to behave, even in unfamiliar surroundings. Then, without warning, the plane shuddered slightly. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but enough to make a few passengers glance up from their phones. The girl's head tilted slightly and she watched the instruments near the cockpit, noting the flicker of a warning light. Her brow furrowed, not in fear but in attention. She noticed how the co-pilot quickly adjusted a dial, and the pilot's hands moved with precision across the controls. To the other passengers it seemed routine, but the girl could tell that something was slightly off. The turbulence became a little stronger. Drinks wobbled on the tray tables and some nervous laughter broke out among the passengers. A man 2 rows ahead gripped his armrests tightly, his knuckles white. A woman tried to calm him, but her own voice wavered as the plane dipped slightly. The girl did not flinch. She watched carefully, listening to the hum of the engines and the soft beeps from the cockpit. Something in her told her to pay attention, to notice every little change. Her calmness seemed to create a small island of quiet around her, in a sea of nervous energy. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, clear but calm. "We are experiencing minor turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." For a moment, everyone felt reassured, except for a few who couldn't stop glancing at the ceiling or the small screens showing the plane's altitude. The girl's eyes, however, remained on the cockpit, watching the movements of the pilots and the changing lights of the instruments. Then, there was a sudden jolt. The plane dropped slightly and a collective gasp rose from the passengers. Cups fell from tray tables and a child cried quietly in the back. The woman sitting next to the 10-year-old looked around frantically, her hands trembling. The girl reached out instinctively and touched the woman's hand, giving a small reassuring squeeze. It was not a gesture born of fearlessness but of awareness. She understood that panic could make things worse. The turbulence worsened for a few moments. The plane seemed to rock side to side. Some passengers held onto their seats or leaned into the walls. One man whispered a quick prayer, eyes closed, trying to steady himself. The girl noticed everything. How the co-pilot's hands moved slightly faster, how the pilot's jaw tightened for just a moment. She could feel the tension in the cabin growing and knew instinctively that she needed to stay calm, if not for herself, then for those around her. A few passengers began to talk louder, voices rising in fear. They speculated about what might happen, each suggestion worse than the last. The girl stayed silent, keeping her focus on observing and understanding. She noticed that a seatbelt light flickered on and off near the back of the cabin. She nudged a small boy next to her, whispering, "Buckle up tight, don't wait." He looked at her, eyes wide, but did as she suggested. That simple action seemed to ripple through the nearby passengers, a quiet influence calming the storm of panic around her. Suddenly, a louder warning beep came from the cockpit. The plane jolted more noticeably, causing a few passengers to cling to their seats. The girl's mother looked worried, reaching for her daughter's hand, but the girl gently held up her hand, signaling her mother to stay calm. Her gaze returned to the cockpit, noting the pilot's furrowed brow and the co-pilot's quick, precise movements. The small warning lights on the panel blinked in a pattern that made the girl's stomach tighten, not with fear, but with understanding that this was more serious than anyone yet realized. The plane's descent slowed momentarily, giving passengers a brief sense of relief. But the girl noticed a subtle flicker in the instruments indicating an irregularity in the engine. She leaned slightly forward, eyes focused. The adults around her were too busy expressing fear or trying to call someone on their phones to notice these details. The girl felt a strange responsibility, even at 10 years old, as if she could do something, even if it was just to stay aware and ready. A sudden lurch sent a few items flying from the overhead compartments. The passengers screamed, gripping whatever they could. The girl instinctively ducked slightly, then straightened again, assessing the situation. She noticed a man a few rows ahead clenching his fists and staring in panic. She leaned forward and called gently, "Hold on, don't fight it. It's going to be okay." The words were soft, but there was certainty in her voice. The man looked at her, confusion in his eyes, and for a brief moment he seemed to calm down, following her silent lead. The turbulence continued. Drinks spilled, papers fluttered through the cabin, and a woman sobbed quietly, holding her child. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom. "Remain calm, we are managing the situation. Everyone stay seated and keep seatbelts fastened." The girl absorbed the words, then focused again on the instruments she could see from her vantage point. Every beep, every flicker mattered, and she could feel the tension in the air like a thick fog pressing down on everyone. The plane rocked again, and the cabin lights flickered. A man whispered hurriedly to the person next to him, "Is this going to be bad?" The girl's gaze met his briefly. She didn't have the answers, but her calmness spoke louder than words. Her presence seemed to remind those around her that panic would not help. She remained still, focused, watching the pilots and the instruments, noting every movement and sound. Then came a moment of brief quiet. The plane's descent steadied slightly. Passengers clutched each other or leaned against their seats, breathing heavily. The girl took a deep breath herself, feeling a strange mix of fear and clarity. She could sense that this was only the beginning, that the real challenge was coming, but for now she simply stayed calm. She adjusted her small bag, touched her mother's hand reassuringly, and whispered quietly, "We can get through this." The adults nearby noticed her composure. One woman whispered to another, "How is she so calm?" The girl did not answer, but her steady presence seemed to create a small ripple of peace amidst the chaos. She scanned the cabin again, noting frightened faces, trembling hands, and nervous glances toward the cockpit. She could feel the fear, but it did not consume her. Instead, she felt an emerging sense of responsibility, a realization that someone needed to remain clear-headed, and that person could be her, even at 10 years old. The plane's engines hummed steadily now, though the occasional flicker of a warning light reminded everyone that the danger was not gone. The girl's eyes remained sharp, observing everything. She noticed a co-passenger struggling to adjust their seatbelt, another clutching a bag too tightly, a child trying to hide under the seat in fear. She moved quietly, helping where she could, giving instructions softly and offering calm reassurance. As the plane continued, she began to understand the rhythm of the situation. The turbulence, the flickering lights, the nervous murmurs, they were all signals. While others panicked, she felt a growing sense of awareness, a readiness to act if needed. She had no idea what the day would bring, but at that moment, she silently vowed to stay focused, to remain calm, and to help anyone who needed her. And so the cabin remained tense, passengers gripping their seats, some quietly praying, some staring blankly ahead. Amid the fear, the girl sat quietly, calm and alert, watching, observing, and preparing. She did not yet know what would happen next, but she was ready to face it. For now, she was the still point in the middle of the storm, a small, calm presence in a cabin filled with rising fear. The first test had begun, and though the passengers did not yet realize it, the girl's courage and focus would soon become their lifeline. The plane shook violently, throwing cups and papers into the air. The passengers screamed and clutched at their seats, some praying, some crying. The hum of the engines had become irregular, and the warning lights in the cockpit blinked faster. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, more strained than before. "We are experiencing an unexpected problem. Please remain calm and stay in your seats." Fear had taken hold of the cabin. Adults were panicking, shouting instructions or questions at one another, some blaming the situation on the pilot or the plane itself. Children cried, clinging to their parents, while a few tried to hide under the seats. The atmosphere was chaotic, tense, and thick with anxiety. The girl, however, remained seated, her eyes fixed on the cockpit, watching carefully. She noticed the pilot's hands were moving fast, but there was uncertainty in his movements, a hesitation that made her aware the situation was serious. A man near the window gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. He muttered repeatedly, "We're going to crash, we're going to crash." The woman beside him tried to calm him, but her voice trembled. The girl watched silently, understanding that fear was spreading faster than the turbulence itself. She instinctively leaned over and spoke quietly to the man. "Stay still. Don't fight the plane. Just breathe." He looked at her, surprised by her calm voice, and slowly began to follow her words, taking shallow, uneven breaths. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. A child a few rows back screamed, and a woman held her tightly, rocking her slightly to soothe her. The girl's mother held her hand, gripping it tightly as if to anchor herself. The girl squeezed back, a small gesture of reassurance. She felt the tension in the cabin, and she knew that her calmness alone might not be enough. But it was all she could offer for now. She started scanning the cabin quickly, noticing small things that could help or harm. A tray table had tilted dangerously, a bag was sliding under a seat, and a loose water bottle threatened to roll across the aisle. She moved her small hand swiftly, securing what she could, and spoke softly to those nearby. "Be careful with that. Keep it tight. Don't let it move." Some passengers looked at her in disbelief that such a young child was giving instructions, but they followed anyway, desperate for any guidance in the chaos. The co-pilot's voice was sharp, urgent as he and the pilot attempted to regain stability. The girl noticed the blinking lights on the instrument panel. They were warnings she didn't fully understand but could sense the danger they indicated. She kept observing, noting the rhythm of the plane's movements and the sounds coming from the cockpit. She began to anticipate moments when the plane would tilt or shake, quietly preparing herself and the passengers nearby for what was coming next. A young boy in front of her clutched his stuffed animal, his eyes wide with fear. She leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Hold it tight, keep it close, and don't look around. Just hold on to me if you need." The boy nodded, tears running down his face, but he followed her advice. Slowly, the tension around them seemed to ease, a small pocket of calm forming around her despite the surrounding panic. The turbulence continued without mercy. The plane dipped sharply, sending a wave of screams through the cabin. The girl's eyes didn't leave the cockpit. She noticed the pilot's hands shaking slightly, the co-pilot taking a deep breath, the flicker of lights on the panel indicating fluctuating engine performance. It was dangerous and she felt it deeply, but instead of fear she focused on what could be done. She was thinking fast, noting which passengers could help each other, which needed guidance, and how to keep everyone safe until the pilot could regain control. A middle-aged woman near the aisle tried to reach for her phone, shaking. The girl quickly said, "No phones now. Keep your hands free and stay seated." The woman froze, realizing the logic in the words. The girl then helped her secure a small child in the seat next to her. The child's face was pale, trembling, but the girl's calm voice seemed to soothe him. The woman looked at her with gratitude, as if seeing hope in a small, unexpected place. The plane tilted sharply again. A loud alarm blared from the cockpit. Passengers screamed louder this time, some holding onto the armrests or each other. The girl's mother whispered, "I don't know what to do." And the girl squeezed her hand, repeating softly, "Just breathe. We can do this. Stay with me." Her voice had a firmness that seemed to steady her mother, if only slightly. She realized that her calmness was contagious, that even a little guidance could ripple through the cabin and make a difference. A man sitting a few rows back fainted from fear. The girl noticed immediately, signaling to a nearby passenger to help. She spoke firmly but gently, directing them to ensure the man's safety, make space around him, and keep him calm until the plane steadied. People began to listen more attentively now, following her instructions without questioning them. They were desperate for direction, and she provided it quietly but effectively. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom, this time more strained. "We are trying to stabilize the aircraft. Everyone remain seated, keep belts fastened." The girl focused on the words, understanding the urgency. She adjusted her own seatbelt, checked her surroundings, and mentally prepared for the next moments of turbulence. She knew the adults around her were frightened and confused, and that if she stayed focused, she could help anchor the cabin in the midst of chaos. The plane rocked violently again. Drinks spilled everywhere, papers flew, and a small child cried, clinging to his mother. The girl quickly moved, making sure nothing blocked the aisle or emergency paths. She whispered softly to passengers nearby, "Hold your seat, don't panic, keep your belts tight." Slowly, more people began to follow her lead, focusing on her calm presence rather than the chaos around them. Time seemed to stretch as the plane continued its erratic movements. Every dip, every tilt, every alarm beeped urgency into the cabin. The girl remained alert, her eyes constantly flicking between the cockpit and the passengers. She knew that fear could spread faster than any turbulence, and she did not want it to take over completely. She guided, reassured, and helped whenever she could, creating small moments of order amidst the disorder. A young teenager started to panic, hyperventilating slightly. The girl leaned close and spoke softly, giving simple instructions on how to breathe slowly, one step at a time. The teen followed her instructions, trying to calm down, and the girl nodded, encouraging her silently. She realized that even small interventions could prevent fear from escalating further. Her presence began to have a tangible effect, creating small pockets of calm throughout the cabin. The plane continued to fight the air currents. The passengers' fear was still high, but now it was mixed with cautious hope, led by the girl's steady example. She noticed a couple of adults looking at her in disbelief, wondering how a 10-year-old could remain so composed. She didn't dwell on their astonishment. Her focus remained on safety, awareness, and calm, knowing that panic was the real enemy, not the turbulence itself. Another jolt shook the plane, and an overhead compartment creaked dangerously. The girl quickly instructed passengers nearby to secure loose items. She moved with confidence, showing others what to do, giving clear instructions and remaining calm even when the plane pitched sharply again. Passengers began to rely on her quiet leadership, following her example instead of giving in to fear. Hours, or maybe only minutes, seemed to pass in a blur of turbulence and alarms. The pilot and co-pilot were working tirelessly, but the girl realized that her calmness was becoming a beacon for those around her. She encouraged a small group to hold on to each other, keep breathing, and listen for instructions. Slowly, the cabin began to stabilize in attitude, if not yet in motion. As the turbulence began to ease slightly, a fragile sense of hope emerged. The girl's small interventions had made a difference, helping prevent total panic. She knew this was just the beginning, that the real challenge was not over. But for now, the passengers had someone to focus on, someone calm, someone capable of guiding them even in the worst moments. The girl, quiet, observant, and determined, had stepped up when fear took over the cabin, showing courage and presence far beyond her years. The plane still faced danger, but for the first time, the passengers had a glimmer of hope amid the storm. The plane was still shaking, but now the passengers were beginning to look to the 10-year-old girl for guidance. She noticed the way their eyes followed her, silently asking for direction. Her calmness, which had started as a small influence, was beginning to ripple through the cabin. She stood slightly, making herself visible, and gestured for people to sit properly and fasten their belts. Her voice was soft but firm, and passengers obeyed without hesitation, even though their fear remained. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, sounding strained. "We are having serious difficulty maintaining altitude. Please stay calm and follow safety instructions." The girl listened closely, trying to understand what was happening, even though she didn't know all the technical details. She realized that if the passengers panicked completely, it would make the situation worse. She had to keep everyone focused. A young mother beside her was shaking, holding her child tightly. The girl leaned over and whispered, "Take slow breaths. Keep your child close and stay calm. You can do this." The woman's trembling slowed and her breathing became steadier. The girl moved down the aisle, checking on others, giving simple instructions, pointing out which way to hold on, which seatbelt to tighten, which items to secure. Slowly, the cabin began to follow her lead. Suddenly, a loud alarm rang from the cockpit, and the plane dipped sharply. Some passengers screamed, some cried, and others clutched each other. The girl raised her hands slightly, signaling for everyone to focus on their own actions and stay seated. "Hold on to your seatbelt. Don't move around. We'll be okay," she said, repeating the instructions calmly and clearly. Her words were a lifeline for those who were lost in panic. She noticed a man near the back looking around frantically, his eyes wide with fear. She walked over and said softly, "Keep your seatbelt tight and hold the back of your chair. Look straight ahead. You're going to be fine." He blinked, processing her words, and slowly followed them, sinking back into his seat. The girl's presence was doing something incredible. Adults who had been panicking were beginning to listen, to act, to focus on the immediate actions rather than the terrifying possibilities. The plane's shaking continued, but now the fear in the cabin had lessened slightly. The girl could see that passengers were starting to cooperate with each other. People helped secure loose items, guided children, and followed her simple instructions. She walked calmly down the aisle, checking on passengers, offering reassurance. "We're going to get through this. Stay seated and hold on. Keep breathing slowly." Her tone was soft but carried authority, and people responded. She noticed a small boy clutching a stuffed animal, tears streaming down his face. She knelt beside him and whispered, "Hold it close, don't let go. You're safe right here." The boy nodded, gripping the toy tightly and focusing on her words instead of the chaos around him. She smiled briefly, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. It was a tiny victory, but in this moment every small action mattered. The pilot's voice over the intercom was tense but steady. "We are trying to stabilize the aircraft. Remain in your seats and keep belts fastened." The girl nodded to herself. She knew that the adults around her were looking to her for guidance now. She moved back toward the middle of the cabin, scanning for anyone who still seemed lost in fear. Her eyes met a woman holding her head, rocking slightly in panic. The girl approached and said, "Look at me. Breathe slowly. You're going to be okay. Focus on me." The woman's gaze shifted, and she began to follow the girl's instructions. Taking shallow, careful breaths, the plane lurched again, and a loud creak echoed from the overhead compartments. The girl quickly pointed to passengers nearby, instructing them to secure their belongings. She helped a man push his bag back under the seat and told him to check the latch above. Her actions were calm and precise, and the passengers followed her lead. The cabin, once chaotic, was now moving with a sense of purpose, guided by her quiet authority. She noticed a teenager trying to hide under the seat, trembling. She knelt and said gently, "Come out slowly and sit back in your chair. Keep your seatbelt fastened. We'll be okay. Just trust me." The teen hesitated, then followed her instructions. The girl's steady presence was creating order, helping people overcome the fear that had threatened to overwhelm them. A man fainted near the back, and the girl quickly signaled to a couple of passengers to make space and support him. She knelt beside him, ensuring he was breathing, and spoke softly to the others. "Give him room, stay calm, and keep belts tight." Her clear, composed instructions helped prevent panic from spreading. The passengers followed her guidance, and slowly, the immediate danger to the man passed. The plane's descent became more controlled, though turbulence still shook the cabin. The girl moved strategically, checking on passengers, giving brief, calm instructions. She noticed one woman trying to use her phone, panicked and crying. The girl spoke gently. "Now is not the time. Keep your hands free. Focus on your seatbelt and your child." The woman obeyed, finally calming herself and focusing on immediate safety. Passengers were beginning to realize that her calmness was more important than any other advice they had been given. A ripple of cooperation spread through the cabin. People helped each other, followed the girl's instructions, and found a small sense of control in a situation that had seemed completely uncontrollable. The girl continued to move among them, encouraging, guiding, and reassuring. Her presence had become the anchor that the cabin needed. The plane tilted sharply, sending items flying. The girl raised her voice slightly, directing passengers to secure themselves. "Stay in your seats. Buckle up tight. We're going to be fine." Her words were met with compliance. Adults followed her guidance, helping children, securing loose items and staying focused on their actions rather than the fear surrounding them. The cabin had become a team, led by a 10-year-old who had remained calm when fear had taken over. The pilot's voice over the intercom returned, calmer than before. "We are regaining some stability. Keep your seatbelts fastened and stay seated." The girl nodded to herself. She knew that the situation was still dangerous, but her guidance had made a tangible difference. The passengers were no longer paralyzed by fear. They were listening, acting, and surviving together. She moved to check on the last few people who still seemed overwhelmed, offering simple, clear instructions that everyone could follow. She noticed a small group huddled together, visibly shaken. She approached and said, "Stay together, keep belts fastened, and breathe slowly. Focus on what you can control." The group nodded, following her advice, and began to calm down. The girl's influence was spreading steadily throughout the cabin. People who had been terrified moments ago were now finding a sense of order and control. Even as the plane continued to move unpredictably, the turbulence continued, but the fear in the cabin had lessened significantly. The girl remained vigilant, moving from seat to seat, offering reassurance, instructions, and quiet support. She encouraged passengers to help one another, reinforcing calm behavior, and slowly the cabin became a more controlled, cooperative environment. Her quiet leadership had transformed the scene from chaos to cautious hope. She paused for a moment, looking at the faces around her. Fear was still present, but it was no longer overwhelming. Adults and children alike were listening to her guidance, following her example and working together to stay safe. The girl realized that this was only the beginning, that more challenges could come, but for now she had made a difference. Her calmness, courage, and quick thinking had turned a cabin filled with panic into one capable of surviving the storm. The plane continued its difficult flight, but the passengers were no longer helpless. They had someone to follow, someone calm and capable, someone who had stepped up when fear had taken over. The 10-year-old girl moved quietly among them, her presence a beacon of steadiness, her voice a source of reassurance, her actions guiding them toward survival. And as the minutes passed, she prepared herself for whatever would come next, ready to continue leading in the face of danger. The plane continued to shake, and the tension in the cabin remained high, but now it was different. The passengers were no longer completely paralyzed by fear. The 10-year-old girl had become a central presence, moving through the rows, offering reassurance, instructions, and small acts of guidance. She noticed the adults following her lead, helping children, securing loose items, and staying focused on what they could control. The turbulence worsened suddenly, jostling passengers violently. A woman near the aisle screamed, clutching her child, while a man shouted in panic. The girl stood slightly, raising her hands, her voice calm but firm. "Stay seated. Buckle your belts. Hold on to something solid." The passengers followed her instructions, some trembling but obeying. She moved down the aisle, checking on children, helping them hold on to their parents and offering quiet words of encouragement. A sudden lurch sent an overhead bag tumbling toward the aisle. The girl reached quickly and secured it, motioning for the passengers nearby to help each other with any loose items. Her movements were calm, precise, and deliberate. Even the adults began to imitate her actions, realizing that following clear, calm instructions helped them manage the chaos. She was quietly creating order amidst the disorder, showing them that there was something they could do to stay safe. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again. "We are having trouble maintaining altitude. Please remain seated and keep belts fastened. Follow safety instructions at all times." The girl listened carefully, watching the cockpit, noting the movements of the pilots and the warning lights on the panel. She didn't understand every technical detail, but she could sense urgency and danger. Her mind worked quickly, calculating how best to keep the passengers calm and organized. She noticed a child near the back of the cabin shaking uncontrollably, clutching a small toy. She knelt beside him and said softly, "Hold it tight, keep it close, and focus on me. Breathe slowly." The child nodded, slowly mimicking her breathing, and the panic in his small body began to ease. She moved on to the next passenger, repeating the same quiet instructions, ensuring everyone she could reach had some guidance. The plane pitched sharply again, causing cups to spill and papers to flutter. Some passengers screamed, but the girl remained calm, moving to help a man who had lost his balance and was struggling to stay in his seat. "Hold the seat in front of you. Keep your belt tight," she instructed. The man obeyed, and slowly he regained his composure. Around her, the cabin was beginning to move in sync with her guidance rather than reacting blindly to fear. She noticed a teenager sitting frozen, unable to hold on properly. She knelt beside him and gently guided his hands to the armrests and instructed him on how to stabilize himself. "Focus on your seat, keep your belt fastened, and breathe slowly." "You're okay." The teen obeyed, visibly calming down. Her presence was a lifeline for anyone still overwhelmed by fear. She moved steadily from seat to seat, helping everyone who needed it, offering instructions, reassurance, and small acts of care. The turbulence persisted, but the girl's leadership had begun to change the atmosphere. The passengers were cooperating, helping each other, and following clear guidance. She noticed a woman trying to hold her child while balancing a loose bag. The girl stepped in, securing the bag and guiding the woman to focus solely on her child. Slowly, the chaos was becoming manageable because of her intervention. A loud alarm sounded in the cockpit, and the plane dropped sharply again. Some passengers screamed, but the girl raised her hands, calling out, "Breathe. Hold on tight. We're going to be okay." Her voice cut through the fear, and people focused on her instead of the panic around them. The girl knew that fear could be contagious, but so could calmness. She concentrated on maintaining her own composure and spreading it to others. She moved to a small boy sitting alone, frightened and crying. She knelt beside him and whispered, "I'm right here. Keep your belt tight, hold on, and breathe with me." The boy's sobs quieted slightly as he mirrored her breathing. She smiled gently, feeling that her actions, no matter how small, were making a real difference. Around her, other passengers began to follow her example, holding on, breathing slowly, and helping each other. The pilot's voice returned, calmer now but still serious. "We are stabilizing the plane. Stay seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The girl nodded to herself. The situation was improving, but she remained alert. She continued moving through the cabin, checking on passengers, guiding children, and helping adults stay focused. Every action she took had an immediate effect, creating pockets of calm and control in the midst of the turbulence. The plane rocked again, but the fear in the cabin was noticeably reduced. Adults and children alike were following her guidance, securing items, holding on, and breathing steadily. The girl moved strategically, making sure that those most vulnerable were helped first. She guided a small group of passengers in the middle of the cabin, showing them how to secure themselves and encouraging them to help one another. Slowly, the cabin was becoming more organized, more coordinated. She noticed a man near the back shaking in fear. She walked over, spoke softly, and guided him in how to hold on, keep his belt tight, and focus on the present moment. The man's breathing slowed, and he nodded at her, showing understanding and trust. She repeated this with a few more passengers, ensuring that everyone had some guidance. Her calm, attentive presence was the anchor that the cabin needed. The turbulence remained strong, but the passengers were no longer acting out of sheer panic. They were listening, following instructions, and helping each other. The girl's leadership had transformed the atmosphere. Adults who had been terrified were now cooperating, securing loose items, guiding children, and maintaining composure. Her presence had created a small, steady force of order within the chaos. A teenager near the aisle was trembling, unable to hold onto the armrest properly. The girl knelt beside him and guided his hands, repeating quietly, "Keep your seatbelt tight, hold the seat, breathe slowly." The teenager followed her instructions, visibly calming. She moved on to check the overhead compartments, ensuring that no loose items could fall during turbulence. Her actions were deliberate, precise, and calm, influencing those around her. The plane pitched and rolled sharply again, but the passengers were more prepared now. They held on, kept belts fastened, and focused on their actions rather than the fear around them. The girl moved through the rows, constantly attentive, giving reassurance, instructions, and small acts of support. She was quiet, calm, and steady, and her presence kept the cabin from descending into chaos. She noticed a woman holding her child tightly, shaking in fear. The girl guided her, saying softly, "Focus on your child, breathe slowly, hold tight. We're okay." The woman nodded, following her guidance. Nearby passengers helped each other, securing loose items and focusing on immediate actions. The cabin was now moving as a team, guided by the quiet authority of a 10-year-old who refused to panic. As the plane continued to fight the turbulence, the girl realized that she had made a real difference. The passengers were no longer lost in fear. They were listening, cooperating, and helping each other. Her calm, focused presence had transformed a cabin full of panic into a controlled, coordinated group. She moved from seat to seat, ensuring that everyone remained secure and calm, ready for whatever came next. The plane was still in danger, but the cabin had a chance now. The girl's quiet leadership, her presence, and her actions had anchored the passengers in the midst of chaos. Adults and children alike were following her guidance, holding on, breathing steadily, and helping one another. She remained alert, focused, and calm, knowing that the real challenge was not over, but confident that she had made a difference when it mattered most. The cabin had survived fear so far, and she would continue to lead them through it until they were safe. The plane shook violently one last time, and the passengers gripped their seats tightly. The 10-year-old girl remained calm, moving quietly through the cabin, offering words of reassurance and guidance. She noticed the tension in the pilot's movements through the small glimpses she could catch from the cockpit. It was clear the plane was still in danger, but she had seen enough to know that calmness and focus could make the difference between chaos and survival. A young mother sitting near the window held her child tightly, shaking with fear. The girl knelt beside them and whispered, "You're safe, hold on tight. And keep breathing slowly." The woman nodded, trying to follow her advice, and her child began to calm slightly, trusting the girl's quiet guidance. Around her, the cabin responded. Passengers were following instructions, securing loose items and keeping a steady grip on their belts. The girl's presence had become a beacon of stability amidst the turbulence. The plane lurched again, more violently than before. Some passengers screamed, some cried, but the girl stood tall and focused. She moved down the aisle, checking on each passenger, offering calm directions and making sure children were safely held or seated. She noticed a man who had been panicking earlier, now holding on to the seatbelt and breathing steadily. The girl gave him a small nod, silently acknowledging his effort to stay calm. Suddenly, a loud alarm rang from the cockpit. The plane dipped sharply, throwing some passengers forward. The girl quickly guided them, pointing out how to secure themselves, and reassured them softly. "Hold tight, keep your belts fastened, focus on now." Her words cut through the fear like a lifeline. People listened, obeyed, and moved with purpose rather than letting panic control them. She realized that even small instructions could save lives when fear was overwhelming everyone. A teenager near the back was trembling violently, gripping his armrests and shaking. The girl knelt beside him and spoke gently, showing him how to hold the seat, adjust his belt, and breathe slowly. The teen followed her instructions, finding a measure of control over his fear. The girl moved on quickly, checking other passengers, making sure everyone was secure and calm. Her actions were small but precise, creating order where chaos had been dominant. The turbulence continued, but now the passengers had a rhythm of cooperation, guided by her presence. Adults helped each other and the children, following the girl's clear and calm instructions. She moved strategically, helping those most vulnerable first and making sure no one was overlooked. The cabin, once consumed by panic, was now working as a team under her quiet leadership. A woman holding her child was panicked and trying to stand up, but the girl gently placed her hands on the woman's shoulders and said firmly, "Stay in your seat. Your child is safe. Keep your belt fastened." The woman obeyed, finally calming down and focusing on her child. Nearby passengers followed the girl's lead, securing loose items and ensuring children were safe. Slowly, the cabin was regaining order, and the fear that had once ruled it was being replaced by cautious attention. The plane rocked sharply again and a loud alarm sounded. Cups spilled, papers flew, and a few passengers cried out. The girl raised her voice slightly, giving precise instructions. "Hold on. Keep your belts tight. Don't move around." Her calmness was contagious. Passengers listened, followed her guidance, and focused on what they could control. Even adults who had been terrified were now cooperating, helping children, securing loose items, and holding on. She noticed a small boy shaking and crying, clutching a toy. She knelt beside him and said softly, "Hold it tight. Don't let go. And breathe with me." The boy focused on her, slowly calming down. Around them, other passengers began to mimic her example, helping each other, adjusting belts, securing items, and following her lead. The cabin had transformed from a place of chaos to one of cautious order, all because of the girl's presence and guidance. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calmer but still serious. "We are stabilizing the plane. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The girl nodded slightly, realizing that the immediate danger was being managed, but that vigilance was still required. She continued moving through the cabin, checking on passengers, offering reassurance, and making sure everyone remained calm and prepared for anything that might come next. A man who had fainted earlier was now sitting up, breathing steadily. The girl smiled at him briefly, then moved on to a woman who was still visibly panicked. She knelt beside her and said gently, "Focus on your breathing. Hold your child tight. Stay calm." The woman followed her instructions, gradually calming down. Around her, passengers were cooperating, helping each other, and following the girl's guidance. Her quiet leadership had created a ripple of control and reassurance throughout the cabin. The turbulence lessened slightly, and a fragile sense of hope filled the cabin. The girl remained vigilant, moving through the rows, checking on each passenger, giving brief instructions and offering reassurance. Children clung to her or their parents, finding comfort in her calm presence. Adults looked at her with astonishment, realizing that this 10-year-old had become their anchor, guiding them through one of the most frightening moments of their lives. The plane's movement stabilized further. The girl moved to the center aisle, making sure everyone was secure and ready. She encouraged passengers to help one another, reinforcing calm behavior and cooperation. Her influence was evident in every small action. A child was soothed, a belt secured, a hand held, a seat adjusted. Her presence continued to hold the cabin together. As the plane prepared for landing, the tension was still present but manageable. Passengers followed instructions, bracing themselves and keeping calm. The girl guided a few passengers near the exits, ensuring that everyone knew what to do when the plane touched down. She whispered encouragement to those who were still scared, offering words of hope and reassurance. The landing was rough but safe. The plane's wheels hit the runway and it slowed gradually. The passengers clutched each other, some crying with relief, some breathing heavily, but all grateful to be alive. The girl remained calm, ensuring that everyone remained seated and secure until the plane came to a full stop. When it finally did, a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. She looked around at the passengers, noticing the exhausted but thankful faces. Adults hugged their children, tears streaming down faces, while others simply stared at the girl with amazement. She had guided them through fear, chaos, and danger, helping them stay alive and focused. The passengers realized that without her calm, clear presence, the cabin might have descended into uncontrolled panic, making the situation far more dangerous. The pilot opened the cockpit door briefly, looking around at the passengers. His eyes met the girl's and he nodded with quiet respect. The cabin erupted in small murmurs of gratitude and astonishment. People quietly acknowledged what had just happened and who had made a real difference. The girl remained humble, simply giving small reassurances to anyone who needed it, not seeking attention or praise. She had done what she needed to do, kept people safe. Emergency personnel approached the plane as it came to a complete stop. Passengers were guided off carefully, many still shaken but safe. The girl walked with her mother, her calm presence still steadying those around her. Passengers thanked her quietly, some in disbelief that a 10-year-old had been the guiding force through the storm. The girl smiled softly, simply glad that everyone was alive and unharmed. News crews and authorities arrived, amazed at the story that was beginning to spread. They would later describe a 10-year-old who had taken charge when fear had overtaken the cabin, guiding passengers calmly and effectively. But for the girl, it was not about recognition. She was simply relieved that the plane had landed safely, that everyone was unharmed, and that she had been able to help. As passengers left the plane, hugging each other and expressing their gratitude, the girl remained composed. She had faced fear, chaos, and danger, and had emerged with a quiet confidence that inspired those around her. The cabin, once filled with panic, had been transformed by her calm, clear presence. She had stepped up when it mattered most, guiding adults and children alike through one of the scariest moments of their lives. And in the end, as the sun shone down on the runway and passengers slowly left the plane, the girl remained humble and quiet, knowing she had done what was right. She had faced fear head-on, helped others survive, and shown that courage and calmness, even from a 10-year-old, could make a difference that no one would ever forget.